Hello and welcome everyone to another one of my videos. Today it's the 29th of October, which is my birthday, and I'm happy to announce to you that I'm going to show you a really cool plugin today. This beat is a little bit weird, by the way. Let me show you what I mean. Normally, if you heard this note and then this one, it would be an octave, but the second one is a little bit higher than an octave, and you can hear that if you have perfect pitch or, I don't know, somewhat reasonable pitch. The octave is actually on this interval. And you might be wondering, why is that? The reason for that is the plugin PitchGrid, which is the plugin that I'm going to show you in this video. And I only changed basically one thing in here, which is this steps parameter, which means how many steps it takes from one octave to another. It basically skips a few notes, which you can also see visualized in this interesting looking editor down here. C, D, and then no E, also no flat A. Yeah, you basically just get a scale, and then you can work with a piano roll as if you were reducing the scale. And you can also try different steps to squeeze different kinds of interpretations out of your composition. And the further you go with this, the greater will be the difference between the lowest and the highest pitch, obviously, because it takes less pitches to go up in octave. It minimizes out at 3 steps, because it already gets pretty ridiculous at this point. For example, if you imagine this parameter going down to 1 step, that would mean that there are only octaves, which would be like, you know, music that only consists of octaves. That would be kind of insane. Oh, by the way, you might be wondering, why can I just change the settings in an individual plugin and everything in this beat changes alongside with it? You would think that you have to load a plugin on every single track to make that work, right? But that is not the case because of what is called MTS-ESP. And you have to check in the specifications of your DAW if MTS-ESP is supported. Gladly, it is supported in Bitwig, so I can just use it. MTS-ESP is a C++ library which basically enables plugin developers to use some sort of global tuning system. So synthesizers that support MTS-ESP can pick up this information and interpret incoming MIDI notes as specific frequencies based on the tuning system, and plugins like PitchGrid can manipulate the tuning system information. If you don't have a DAW that supports MTS-ESP, you can also run this plugin in MPE mode, which is even recommended by the developer because the developer believes that it can be useful to have different tuning systems on different tracks. As an example for that, if you listen to blues music, then you would notice that the organs are typically equal temperament, while the vocalist is singing with some sort of temperament, and you could mimic that by using different pitch grid settings on different tracks. I personally enjoy the MTS-ESP mode more because I believe that the tuning system should always be global, and deviations from the tuning system on specific notes should be solved via pitch bend or note expressions of different kinds. But I would like to know your opinion on that in the comments if you have an opinion. Now, obviously, there aren't a lot of synthesizers out there that even support MPE, or MTS-ESP is even more rare, but for example Serum2 does, and if you don't want to spend money, Surge XT also does. In this beat I only used Serum2 because I'm more familiar with the interface of Serum, so that was a little bit more comfortable. Every time I want to try something new with PitchGrid, I have to deactivate the instance and make a duplicate, because when you are using MTS-ESP, then there can only be one instance at a time, obviously, because this instance tries to manipulate the global tuning parameters, and if there are 2 instances, then like which instance is the one that decides that, right? That would make no sense. So you have to be a little bit careful for that if you are using the plugin in MTS-ESP mode once it is released. This is just some sort of a teaser. I've been given this plugin before it is released because I like to test plugins and always give a lot of feedback on stuff, and I like to present plugins. So that's why I already have it, and you can have it too soon, I hope. The thing that I want to try now is using this second steps parameter, turning it down to 7. And now as you can see, both of these parameters are on 7. So we don't only have 7 steps per octave, but we also have this grid represent equally spaced intervals, exactly 7 per octave. So when you align these two parameters, that means that you are exactly in this Edo scale, especially if you also activate snap to ruler marks. So now we can run this beat in different Edo scales, like in this case 7 Edo. And as you can hear, that sounds super pleasant. I didn't even compose it in 7 Edo, but when I heard it in 7 Edo, I immediately knew that is the way I wanted to sound in general. Again, let's go back. Now this is also interesting. Now we are in 31 Edo, but we are only picking 7 steps out of this super huge Edo scale. We can barely make out all of the intervals, but it still picks somewhat reasonable steps within the tuning system. I don't know what kind of logic it uses to do that. It does not look equally spaced, but it does sound very reasonable. And that's really cool. Probably has something to do with this mode, which is essentially the just intonation mode, which interprets frequencies as frequency ratios instead of equally spaced intervals. And then there was also the harmonic series mode, which uses the harmonic series to determine the frequency, which gets more dense towards the high end, I think, if I interpret that correctly. And yeah, what I wanted to say is when you go up with the steps in Edo mode, then you get a more higher resolution kind of tuning system, even if you use just a few steps. Very interesting stuff. And now I could go ahead and just deactivate snap to ruler markings and instead use the scale and tuning part of the interface to mess with this tuning system, because you can actually get it to really crazy states like that. Now the most obvious thing to do is just changing the root frequency. Which simply transposes everything. Now this might look trivial, but I would say that this is actually huge, because the alternative to this root frequency parameter is that you either go into all of your notes and transpose the MIDI, but then you can only go in semitone steps, or you go into all of your synthesizers and use the master tune parameter, or in this case it's called global tuning, to change whatever the tuning is like. And you could have synthesizers that do it in a different way, like Synth 1, for example, does it in cents as an offset from 0. So you don't really know what kind of hertz you are in. You only know how many cents you deviate away from it. And in Serum you have exact frequency values. So there is no consistency between synthesizers, how this kind of thing is being handled. So just the fact that you have one single place where you can change the root frequency of everything already improves the workflow of finding the sweet spot of your beat immensely. And it levitates the idea of a chamber pitch from something that is only used by esoteric people who want to tune it down to 432 hertz because it's like the godly frequency or some shit, or people who just add a little bit of an offset to the master tune parameter so that they can tune it to their instruments, to something that you can actually use to find the sweet spot of your entire music after you've already composed it. So this is huge. Now the stretch parameter. When you stretch really hard, then the difference between the lowest and the highest pitch is extreme. And you can see it in the oscilloscope very well that some of these bass notes are going super low now, so low that you cannot hear them anymore. But they really mess with the low end, with the headroom I mean. And some of the higher pitches are going so high that it's almost ear piercing. But it has quite an enchanting vibe. And now instead going down to the lowest value. Almost sounds like a swarm of bees because everything is pretty much on the same note. Almost like everything's playing in unison. Has a lot of tension. But you can also put it on some rather reasonable value in the middle and just find something that is not quite where you were before, but slightly somewhere else in an interesting way. This is where you would find more of a subtle temperament. Let's go on to this Q parameter. When you turn it down, then almost every note is the same, which you can also see represented in this graphic. But when you turn it up, the same from the other side around. And then you can dial in how much unison it should be. And again, somewhere in the center of the parameter value, you can put it to something that sounds reasonable. And that way you can explore many different universes within your composition. You can take a single composition and find a lot of different ways to interpret it. And you could even go ahead and modulate these parameters. Get some really trippy effects out of your music. I would personally like it more if things like that were global to the project, not just as in global MTS-ESP parameters that are adjusted by a plugin, but part of the project settings of the DAW, or maybe on the same level as BPM is being handled, as something that can be modulated over time so that it's more close to how it acts here with the plugin parameters, so that the information can be forwarded to all of the plugins automatically and they have to work with it. But in order to do that, we would have to invent a new plugin format that actually asks for this kind of information, and until we reach this point, which is probably still far in the future because no one is actually talking about that, we will have this solution, and it's the best solution so far, MTS-ESP with plugins like PitchGrid, to come up with our own tuning systems. And I'm really looking forward to this whole category of plugins that lets you create own tuning systems with interesting workflows like this, that are kind of visualizing the problem and making something that is actually much more complicated accessible to people like me who don't want to dive too deep into the theoretical side of music theory. Alright, I want to show you one fun fact about Serum2, by the way. You might be wondering, why would you want to buy Serum2 and not stick to Serum1? I just added another oscillator to the pad, which will sound a little bit harder than before. And now, if I went up 7 semitones, it sounds like this. And And you might notice that this is not what 7 semitones would sound like in whatever scale I'm in right now, but it is a perfect fifth as interpreted in 12 Edo. I was sitting here wondering, why does it not respect that I'm in a different MTS-ESP scale? But then I tried right clicking on this and found out that there were different modes, and if you took the steps mode, then it will choose 7 steps in respect to the current MTS-ESP scale. And then you can find an interval that actually works with the music that you're currently composing. As in this case, +4 sounds pretty reasonable. Can put it into your filter. And it sounds cool. I hope you enjoyed my little birthday video. PitchGrid. Hopefully available soon, because it's awesome. That is how I like the microtonal development to continue. By the way, one thing before we close off this video. What do you like more? This beat in 7 Edo? Or this beat in 12 Edo but with 7 steps? Super similar, but I think I actually like it more in perfectly 7 Edo. Anyway,